Let's exercise our thinking a little bit. Work the noodle. I bet everybody got up this morning, did some physical exercise, did a lap around the block, did some push-ups or some sit-ups, whatever. Got your meditation in. Let's exercise our thinking. Let's do some mental exercises. What if we all lived to 1,000? We lived 1,000 years. That was human life expectancy. What do you think would be different? What would be different? How would humanity be different? How would you be different, if at all? Maybe be exactly the same. Maybe the circumstances of your life would be totally the same. What would be different? Would everything be totally different? Would you look totally different? Would you act totally different? Can you even imagine? How interesting. How interesting, or not interesting at all. Do you think that that's interesting? I think it's worth exploring. I think that if you do run it out, you play out your life, if you got to do it essentially 10 times, how would you do it differently? What choices would you make? What would you start doing? What would you stop doing? Would you start doing those things immediately? Would you stop doing certain things immediately, knowing that you would live to 1,000 years old? Do you think that you'd like the same kinds of foods? Would your favorite food be the same over the course of 1,000 years? Would you be the fan of the same sports teams over the course of 1,000 years? Can you imagine being a fan of a struggling sports team for 1,000 years? For many of you, you probably already feel like that. You feel like I've been a tortured fan of this team for 1,000 years, intellectually, spiritually, everything. That's what it feels like. So maybe you already feel like that. But I think it's an interesting thing. I think it's worthwhile to sort of think about. Would we stay with the same person? Would we be married in a relationship with the same person for 1,000 years? Again, maybe you already feel like that. Maybe it feels really good. You could really take this a lot of different ways and directions. What would be the worst thing if you lived to 1,000? What would be the best thing if you lived to 1,000? I think it's all interesting. I think it's worth thinking about. So again, essentially, we'd be living 10 times our current lifetimes. So if you're trying to figure out what your life would look like, what you would look like if you 10x'd your current life, why not do that? What does that bring up? Is that like, oh my goodness, that's great. I could totally just do this, run this 10 times. Would it be like, oh my gosh, I'm getting my lunch eaten this time around. Maybe I'll try again, really change things up. Yeah, maybe you'd segment it out 10 different lifetimes. That's interesting. Or would you continually pursue the same goals? What would somebody like Elon Musk accomplish over the course of 1,000 years? Oh my goodness. Can you even imagine? You and I, same thing. Could we accomplish one of the things that Elon Musk has accomplished if you gave us 1,000 years to do it? I don't know. Imagine that there's no limit to the amount that you could learn and do, or we could just be giant blobs and, tubs of crap. Who knows? So currently here on planet Earth, credit card debt is around $6,000 a person. So would you be $60,000 in credit card debt at the end of 10 years or end of 1,000 years? Probably way more than that. If you put interest on there, 20% interest. Oh my goodness. That's a big number. What about how 2/3 of us are living paycheck to paycheck? Will we just do that for 1,000 years? Would we just constantly be living paycheck to paycheck for 1,000 years? Or would we eventually figure it out? 70% of us are overweight right now. Is that going to keep going? Are we going to eat ourselves into absolute oblivion? Would food just get better and better? Oh my goodness. A very small percentage of us can run a mile. Would that get less or better or worse? Can you run a mile right now? Can you do 10 push-ups? How much time are you spending on screens? How much time am I spending on screens? And I'm 1,000% turning this on myself as well. interrogate my own reality. What if everything I was doing, if I just ran it out 10 times, how would that look? Some things great, some things not good. 65% of us right now are playing video games every day. 60% of us are gambling every day. Half of us won't read a book this year. 65% of us use alcohol. Would alcohol be a thing if we lived 1,000 years? Or would it be the most important thing if we lived 1,000 years? Most of us sleep less than 7 hours. 20% of us are struggling with some kind of mental illness right now. Half of us don't like our jobs. We're not happy with our work. Brutal. Can you imagine doing your job for 1,000 years? Whew, you're like, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine doing it for another year. I can't wait to retire. So if I have to do this for 1,000 years, that would not be good. That's probably evidence, if you feel that way, that you ought to be pursuing or trying to figure out something different. Right now, and probably always, our minds wander about half the time. I'm always fascinated by that statistic right there. Do you think that your mind wanders 50% of the time? Is it wandering now? Yeah. And you put it, and you think about the context of your mind wandering half the time. And if you're a person who says, I just can't get anything done, I can't get a lot done, there's not enough hours in the day, well, that's your key right there. That it's an absolute area that you can improve upon and get double the amount of time that you're currently getting things done. And I'm not advocating that you try to get things done, all the time. There's plenty of times that it's wonderful to zone out or game or whatever you're into. I'm not making judgments on any of this stuff. What I want you to do is for you to make judgments on all this stuff. And I want you to be pretty firm in how you are evaluating what you're currently doing, just in the context of then extrapolating or putting that out for 10 lifetimes, so 1,000 years anyway. And 90% of us waste time every day. I know I certainly do. So run that out 10 times. How would humanity be doing? Just this big lump of us. Would we figure it out? Would we eventually find peace in the Middle East? Would we eventually just all come together as a human community? Or after 1,000 years of the same people, would we just destroy each other? Would we all eat each other? Run out of food? There's a whole nother set of problems there. Or maybe it would just literally be the embodiment of Idiocracy and the movie WALL-E. If you've not seen Idiocracy and or WALL-E, those are worth watching. Idiocracy is hilarious. Part of me thinks that if you did run this program out 1,000 years, that's probably what we turn into, because it feels like we're getting pretty close to that right now. Anyway, what do you think? Would everybody eventually lose their hair? Would we all be bald? Would you have to keep that stupid tattoo you got in college for 1,000 years or high school? If you had a bad knee or a bad back, would you just have to have a bad back for 1,000 years? That would be pretty crappy. So, fundamentally, the question, the thought exercise is, would we figure out how to live healthy lifestyles, or would just extra time absolutely crush us like it's kind of doing now? Again, how would you do with it? And I guess a big part of that is how are you doing now, and why would anything change? We are absolute creatures of habits. We follow predictable patterns and routines. So you get up and you do your life the way you do it, and you do it probably pretty similarly every day. So why would anything change? And it won't. An object at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. An object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. So what is that outside force that is going to motivate you, inspire you, cause you, force you to actually change? I don't know. Interesting. What do you think that life is too short to do? What do you find right now you're thinking to yourself, oh, yeah, I wish I had more time to do these things. So is that a function of not having enough time? Is it a function of having too many current obligations? When you suss that out, like, okay, am I not doing enough? Or am I just doing way too many things that I really don't want to be doing? How do I reduce the list of things that must be done so that I have more time, space, energy, whatever, to do things that I'm actually interested in, curious, wanting to do? It's interesting. What do you think that life is too long to do? What is it too long for? Well, maybe even the same things. Life is way too long to be in bad relationships. Doesn't mean you need to get out of the relationship. It just means that you need to change and improve, fix communication, whatever it might be. You are not healthy. If you are sick and you're not feeling well, life is too short to not feel good, at least not feel bad. Our life is too long, rather, and too short. It's both of these things. I believe that each of us has enough time to do most anything and everything that we want to do, but we don't have enough time to waste. And if we adopt that mindset, I think that that's helpful in helping us to be more thoughtful and intentional about what it is that we're giving our most important resources of time, attention, energy, and money to. When we're really clear, when we have that perspective, a more of a long-term perspective, an eye on the future, but living as presently or as purposefully full. It's a good word, purposely full. I like that. It's kind of like that smartly, purposely full. When we could be more purpose-driven and more intentional, I think that that's when we start getting more of what we want. So why not think about your life in the context of living to 1,000, and what would you change? I like to think about life in these 6 areas, because when you just talk about or think about what would you change in life, it's like, oof, I don't even know. I don't even know where to start. I can't pick that up. It's unwieldy. So think about what you want your family to look like. It's like goal setting, but in 1,000 years versus, 100 years or 50 years, however many years you have left. It's an interesting conversation too. That'll really hasten things. I just turned 45, so, assume that I'm halfway through. So another 45, 50, 55 years. That changes the math a little bit, changes the perspective a little bit. So from a family standpoint, what do you want? From a community standpoint, what's most important to you? What would you do if you had 1,000 years? What would you do if you had a year? From a career standpoint, for your work, what is it that you want? The impact you're interested in having. From a financial standpoint, that's a really interesting one, because obviously we have needs and we have wants. I need money today. I need money 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now. And apparently during this exercise, I'm going to need money 1,000 years from now. So it's a lot to chew on, but it's an interesting context. From a personal development standpoint, are you somebody who is going to be continually learning? What are you going to learn? If you had 1,000 years, what would you tackle? All of it? Some of it? Would you become an absolute master at a couple of things? One thing, being physically well, mentally well, emotionally well. What can you do there? Can't imagine going through 1,000 years and suffering from a mental illness or being depressed for 1,000 years. And I imagine that being depressed for a day probably feels like it's 1,000 years. From a peace of mind perspective, if you don't have peace of mind, it's like you're locked in the jail of your mind for 1,000 years, like so many of us are now. So those are the 6 areas. Think about, if you ran it out 1,000 years, 10 lifetimes, what would it look like? What do you need to get better at? What do you need to do better at? And these are things that I think that we can do now. I'm trying to advocate for myself, trying to do a good job of standing with me. We have choices in who we stand with, who we advocate for, what we advocate for, what we stand with. And not enough of us, myself included, are advocating and standing with ourselves. Because if you did just run out what you're currently doing for 1,000 years, certain parts of it would probably be great. Other parts of it be probably a hot dumpster fire, just hot garbage. The idea is, how do I sharpen that up a little bit? How do I get the rough edges sanded down, whatever it might be? I'm interested in being an interested person. I'm interested in being engaged in everything that I do. And if there's things that I'm not interested or engaged in, I'm interested in not doing those things anymore. I want to be active. I want to have a strong body, strong mind. I want to be curious. I want to compete. I want to be a competitive person. I also want to be really caring and care for people. I want to be kind to everyone. And I'm trying to do those things now. It doesn't mean I'm doing it now. I'm trying to do it now. I fall short a lot. That's the thing about setting goals and having standards that you're trying to reach for and live up to, is that none of it's a game of perfect. The closer that we can get, better off that we're going to be. And you get closer by trying, giving your attention and your energy and these things, your resources, to the things that are most important to you. And I'm trying to do those things now, not next week, not next year, not 500 years from now. I'm interested in being, and I advocate that you do the same, become a modern Renaissance man or Renaissance woman. Have many, many interests. Be good at many, many things. Be interesting. Be interested. Think that that will help you today. That'll help you 10 years from now, and it'll help you 800 years from now. Whatever length of time you're interested in, or however long you expect to be around, what can we be doing right now? So I want you to interrogate your reality as I try and interrogate mine. What would you do if you lived to 1,000? Why not do that today? Act accordingly. Do your part by doing your best.